Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Today we're talking about The Last of Us, the live-action adaptation inspired by the video game of the same name, which recently concluded its second season on HBO Max. And our guest is cinematographer Catherine Goldschmidt. Katie, welcome to Below the Line.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We're glad to have you here. Also joining me as co-host today is Gianni Damaia, who has played the video game. Gianni, welcome back.
Thank you. Always excited to be here.
Warning for listeners, today's conversation will contain spoilers. We're going to get right into it. Katie, tell me how you became involved with season 2.
The call came through my agent, and I met Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann, who are the co-creators and showrunners and writers, and some of the producers. We had a nice chat, and then I met Ksenia Sereda, who's the other DP on the show, and then they offered me the job.
You mentioned Ksenia Sereda, who was one of the DP's first season as well. And so I'm curious how it works for you. You did episodes, if I'm correct, 2, 4, and 7. Are you guys siloed from each other? Give us some sense of what that working relationship is like.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was great to talk to Ksenia right at the beginning because she let me know that, generally speaking, the show, this was definitely true first season. And now that the second season is out, you can see it's structured. It's not exactly a road movie, let's say, but it's still like the characters move from place to place. So you don't have these repeating sets. So there's not a lot of sharing of that kind of thing. And they shoot sequentially. So in other words, Ksenia shot episode 1 while I was prepping episode 2, and then I was shooting episode 2 while she was prepping episode 3. And so in that way, you are sort of, on your own journey, but obviously, you're working within the framework of the show that was set up in season 1, that's continued in season 2. And so, I mean, for me, obviously I loved season 1. I loved how it looked. I loved, the game as well is a huge visual reference. And so all of those things go into it. But then, I was working with 3 different directors on my 3 different episodes. And I would say within each episode, there's something that we're trying to do, visually speaking.
Jumping into a little bit of the game stuff, because obviously that's why I'm here. I'm one of those guys. I'm going to try my best. I'm on my best behavior to not be like, that's different from in the game on this podcast, but we'll see how that goes. But I'm like one of those who I went to the midnight release back when you used to have to go into GameStop to buy physical releases. And I went to the midnight release and bought The Last of Us. And I remember saying to myself, this is going to be the one that's going to get like regular audiences to actually appreciate narrative in video games. So thank you for making that dream come to life all these years later.
And to put on the record for anyone who doesn't know, Gianni plays the games. I do not play the games. So I am coming at it without that background as well. But Gianni, please take us away.
Yeah, no, I send Skid like all the little like cutscenes. I'm like, see how it's a little bit different. He probably doesn't even watch it, but I want to talk. I think just dive directly into episode 2 because it's one of the most consequential moments in the Last of Us 2, the game, where you actually handle Joel's death, as we had already said. Spoilers. But so when you're dealing with a show like The Last of Us, obviously it's different from like a normal sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like you don't exactly have a normal shot list. You have an actual sort of previs that's presented to you from the cutscenes of the game, I presume. Or are you trying to make it your own, as unique as possible? And the reason I say is because a lot of the shots in that actual scene are match shots that are exactly in the game, but then you add in your own visual flourishes where you do like that top-down shot at the end when Ellie crawls over to Joel, things like that. So I'm curious, how much of it are you able to make your own? How is that conversation collaborative? How does that actually work when you get to a scene like that?
To talk about Joel's death in particular, one of the first questions that Mark asked, aloud, and we sat down to watch the cutscene of, I guess not his death in particular, but just when they first get to the chalet and Abby pulls the gun on him and reveals who she is, and all of that in the game plays as one. So the question was like, oh, should we be trying to do that? And then, of course, we read the scene, and the scene itself, the script, has all these other story points that aren't in the game. Dina's there. Dina has frostbite. She needs to be tended to. She needs to see the wolf patch on the back. Like there's all this extra detail and storytelling that has to happen. And so very quickly it just became, we can't do this in one, that's not how it's written. So yeah, I would say, it's very sort of, it's more objective, the camera work, all the way up until Ellie comes in, and then the camera work becomes very subjective, and we really are more in Ellie's perspective and experiencing what she's seeing from where she's seen it. Yeah, that top-down shot though, that idea came about because that location is a real location with these, giant, what do I want to say, 2-story tall windows, which was kind of my own my own challenge with how to, as far as how to, like, we were shooting there for a week, and it's meant to be just one snowstormy afternoon. And of course, within the space of a week, we had sun, we had rain, we had snow, and those are south facing windows as well. So the sun is just constantly moving and streaming straight in. So anyway, side tangent, I had to sort of deal with all of that and control all of that. But basically we're in this amazing space with this amazing height, and I sort of felt all the time like, because we were going to keep the camera, closely connected to the characters and on the ground and crawling with Ellie, that we would never really appreciate that space. So that was the first question I had, is just like, when would we notice where we are? When is that appropriate? And then it also just felt like the end of that scene needed some kind of, not a button, but just a sort of way out, really, because we knew we had this closing montage that we wanted to get to that, involved these more sort of elegant choreographed camera moves. And I think we just needed space from the characters, really. And I think we needed to be able to, see from afar, how alone in the world Ellie is now that Joel is gone. And so that's where the idea for that shot came from.
Talking just because you mentioned something about the giant open windows and what a hazard it is to try to light under those circumstances and keep the light consistent. Were you
Yeah.
working heavily with the VFX team when you were trying to navigate that stuff, or is that all practical? Like you're trying very hard to put whatever tarps you need over it in order to make it look consistent.
Yeah, it's a collaboration with me and VFX, definitely, because, the times that we are looking out those windows, and if it's not looking right out there, then they have to help with that ultimately. But yeah, I mean, I think for Mark, the priority across those days, this is Mark Mylod, the director, was definitely just to prioritize the performances above everything else. So even though we could look ahead and we could see like, oh, it's going to be sunny on Wednesday, should we shoot the opening scene where they wake up on Wednesday because it doesn't matter if it's sunny that day. But no, because we definitely wanted to shoot in story order everything that happens in that room and end the week, with the death, because this was our first week of filming as well. So it's like we were just sort of thrown in at the deep end, really. And so yeah, so whatever the weather was, we just wanted to not think about that, basically. And so yeah, so I had my key grip. We had a construction crane at that location. We had a big 40 by 60 blackout outside the windows. The production designer agreed to install all these blinds, basically, that I promised, we'd try to roll them up and they would be invisible because they obviously messed up the look of the place. But I just needed them for light control when we didn't see the windows. Anyway, that's Don McCauley, who's very helpful with that, and the set deck folks managed that for me on set. And so anyway, so in this way, we tried to be really flexible and be able to, shoot in any order the actors wanted, really. Like I think in the end, Bella wanted to do their performance first, the day that we were meant to do the death, obviously. So we started with Bella. We just didn't want to be in that situation where it was like, oh, but the sun's over here, so now we really need to turn around. This was not the scene work to be doing that with.
This is a question that Skid and I think rarely get the opportunity to ask something like this, but like Mark Mylod, obviously director, as you'd said, is no stranger to major character deaths on his shows,
Yeah.
if you just go back through some of his filmography. But I'm wondering, or just curious, do you feel the weight of those scenes? Is it more precious? Do you close the set? Is it that type of environment? Or are people just like cut and then laughing and joking and everything's all the same?
Oh, I love that question. Because yeah, I think that is why that is a big reason why I was so nervous about shooting that scene. It's just, yeah, it's such an emotional scene. It means so much for the show and for people watching the show. And what happens in the scene is actually incredibly disturbing and upsetting. So I think the way we approached it obviously is the rehearsal is fairly private. I'm there, the A camera operator is there, Mark is there, the AD is there, and the actors are there, and that's it. And I remember watching the rehearsal and thinking like, oh, this is going to be, yeah, this is going to be like upsetting maybe for a bunch of people on the crew when they see this for the first time. And so when the crew comes in to do what we call in England the crew show, can't remember what they call it in Canada. Anyway, the part where you show the crew what the blocking is and stuff, what the scene is. I actually asked the AD, Dan Miller, like, do you think you should actually give a little like trigger warning in case people haven't, read the sides today? They don't know what they're about to see. And he did. And then it was interesting. And then it's like once you actually start breaking it down and doing it shot by shot, like for me, it wasn't as emotional. Like watching the rehearsal was very emotional. But as soon as it wasn't so much a play, but the thing we were doing, then I think I just got into the technical aspect. And I think the actors actually kept it light for each other. I think all the fireflies, I mean, this was their first, was it? No, I think they had done one scene together for episode 1 already. But they were very friendly with each other. And I think there was, yeah, definitely the actors were sort of doing their thing. And it didn't seem, basically, I was surprised that it wasn't heavier than, yeah, I was surprised it wasn't heavier.
Hey, before we get more into the practical aspects of how you accomplish some of these shots, I want to take a step back and talk about the relationship with the game. Katie, is it correct that you had not played the game, right? You did not come in as a game player on this.
That is correct. Yes, that's right.
Now, I know that Warner Brothers, just as part of their publicity push, is making a big deal about how close things are. In fact, the behind the scenes featurette at the end of the episode, they're doing mirror. They're putting up the shot from the game and then your shot for a lot of those scenes. And I'm just curious, is this a fun challenge or does this feel sort of like a restriction for you as a cinematographer? How do you approach this kind of situation?
I've actually been surprised to see so many like side by side, comparisons. And I think it's a little bit more like novelty. I don't know, maybe this is just my interpretation because yes, the game is a visual reference. It's definitely a reference for the set design. Some sets are designed almost exactly like how it is in the game, the theater set, for example, the guitar store. And therefore, or not therefore, but definitely also the scripts, some scenes are very much like the game and some scenes are different or don't exist in the game. And so I would say that, the visual approach is doing the same thing, right? Is like sometimes we are trying to, follow the game, mimic the game. The guitar scene is a perfect example I could give, my director on that episode, Kate Herron. She was a huge fan of the game and she immediately identified that scene as being completely iconic for game players. And that, she was very, very attached to paying homage to the game.
From episode 4, that scene.
From episode 4, yeah, yeah. And for me, like, that was great to have that insight. But, episode 2, like, yeah, as far as is it restrictive? I mean, for example, like the fence scene in episode 2, that is in the game. I think the lead up to it is totally different. I think what happens afterwards is totally different. But that fence crushing Abby, we definitely watched that. And what we could tell, Mark and I, even though neither of us was a game player, like we could just feel the claustrophobia. We could feel how scary that was and how visceral that was. And so we definitely wanted to mimic that. That was definitely really important to us. And it was clearly important to, to Craig and Neil as well. And so, I mean, I don't think, it's not like the shots are by design identical, but, because it's like the same character in the same situation. And, but like, for example, like you are free to play. So we knew we wanted the camera to be down there with her leading and following and being claustrophobic. And so that was my challenge, right, is to figure out how technically to do that.
And that's my next question, Katie. Yeah, exactly. You led right into it.
Perfect. So yeah, so how we did that was it's a very small telescopic arm. It's called an F27, and we could take it off its base. So we could lay it on the snow. And then on the end of it, instead of our hero camera, which is the Alexa 35, I put this really small. It's a gimbal camera combined called the Ronin 4D, which is what they shot all of Adolescence on, for example. And so that just made the whole footprint, so much smaller so that the fence could come so much lower. And that just, skated back and forth along the snow. But of course, I think it was like while we were resetting sometime, or like I think Mark was just like, oh, we should be crashing in, let's use it and crash into her. I don't think anything like that is actually in the game. So it's not like you're never locked into a thing. It's always what you think would be good, would be appropriate, would help elevate, the material.
Is the physical gimbal arm like long enough that it like kind of extends all the way out, or is it just the lens itself?
No, so it's on a telescopic arm. So
Got it.
the gimbal and the camera are combined, and the operator can control that remotely.
Mhm.
And that goes on the end of this F-27 arm, which is 27 feet long, basically. So that's the extension.
That's unbelievable. And you had mentioned something that wanted to ask about. Is it real snow?
It is mostly real snow. There is some fake snow in there also.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll leave it to eagle-eyed viewers to determine which is which.
We shot in Whistler, and we shot it over 2 days. And I think one of the days it was actually snowing, and one of the days it wasn't. And so there's real snow on the ground, but I think there's a lot of fake snow flying around the place.
Wow.
So, Katie, if I understand correctly, then so the video game gives you like a reference for the scenes, but then you guys are building on that. It's not necessarily hitting every beat, or they're not like storyboards for what you guys
They're
are doing.
not. No, they're definitely not storyboards. No, 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 definitely not. Even I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, in fact, the whole Abby, from when Abby slides down into the, I don't know what to call it, sort of plateau, where then all the infected wind up, popping out of the snow and the horde chases her down the hill. The sequence really starts there and continues all the way until she scales the fence, and then the other fence falls on her. And then, so that whole sequence got prevised by VFX. And to be honest, I think there was a version of it that existed even before Mark and I started. So we could start already with, this thing that we could feed back on really and give notes to and add shots to and take shots away and iterate. And so, yeah, but that was created again, based on the scripts, based on, discussions with Craig. Yeah. And then we sort of took it and ran with it.
And Katie, did that previs go all the way to the Abby meets Joel? Because there it suggested, again, behind the scenes, that your camera moved from her up to him and his arm coming in. That did look like or they had a game still of that. And then what you guys did, which again seemed like a great way to make it happen. But I don't know that you and Mark would have stumbled on it the same way without the game prompting. And so I just, again, curious how far the previs goes on a sequence like that.
Good question. I can't remember if it went all the way to it usually doesn't include, actors. Really the main purpose of it before we show up is for visual effects to get an idea of how to budget, basically. But the amazing thing about the Abby sequence is that honestly, it's almost entirely in camera. Like we actually did bring an infected horde up the mountain in Kananaskis. And they did run down that mountain. So yeah, and special effects was doing, an amazing job with the snow. And I think they're like, I mean, I've seen that scene cut together before visual effects and after, and I have to say, I would say primarily it's all done in camera.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then jumping to the part of the episode that is, of course, not from the game, which is the assault on Jackson, which is a super consequential sequence of events. Obviously, a lot of different infected hordes, all that kind of stuff. I'm assuming that you had to work very heavily with the VFX team for a lot of that stuff. You get even a shot, which is like a moneymaker shot that I think you see in the trailer of Tommy holding the flamethrower to a bloater, and it's like just craziness. Can you talk us through some of that sequence? What are the challenges of something that large scale, and how long did it take, and all that kind of stuff?
Oh God, how long did it take? Oh, I can't remember anymore. But basically it was the end of our block, and I think our block shot for 24 days. And then we had a second unit who worked, I think, 12 days.
Mm.
But actually, how many of those days were the battle? I feel like we were doing it for like 2 weeks or something. But yeah, so again, you're right. That is a very heavily VFX sequence. So again, previs. But yeah, I mean, I think, how that sequence works really is that we're really trying to root the audience as much as possible with Tommy and Maria. Like those are our sort of anchor points. And so, like, for example, when the horde is coming around the corner down Main Street, we had 3 cameras down on the street level with Tommy. And that was our main unit anyway, most days. It's a 3 camera show, basically. And then the second unit joined us that day, and they were a 2 camera unit. And so we put those 2 cameras up on the roofs with Maria. And that was great because then, because we had, hundreds of extras actually all made up and running and coming around the corner, then that's how you sort of do that for real. And yeah, and so much of it is just, you're just breaking it down really and saying, okay, well, this is hero action with a hero actor. That's main unit work. This is, just stunts or just, I mean, yeah, stunts. um, so this is second unit. And, so the ADs are very, very on top of all this of figuring out who should be doing what. But, for me as the DP of the episode, and then I was working closely with JP Passy, who shot second unit, we have to figure out, they're figuring out who does what work or whatever, but because we were often shooting, the 2 units were often side by side on the same backlot set. And for me, the biggest challenge of the episode is just, it's a snowstorm the whole time. And again, we're shooting for 2 weeks or whatever in this location that they built the set in a place called Manatee Bay, which is just, I think it's just north of Vancouver on the way to Whistler. And my key grip told me, I think on like the first day of working together, that Manatee means something like the windy place, which in terms of sun control is bad, right? Because it's, you can't have giant sails in the sky when the wind kicks up. But yeah, but we knew we had to control the sun somehow, and we definitely did get some sunny days. And so that was our challenge between me and JP, was figuring out, who was going to get which construction crane and how the cranes had to move around the set because we could only afford 3 of them. Yeah, but it was really fun. And honestly, when we put the units together and we were doing all that for real, it was great.
When the horde actually like fully comes through, you got that shot of, I think it's when Tommy comes back in before the dogs all come and like sort of save the day, the heroic dogs, all of that stuff. That would you say it's mostly practical stunt performers and then VFX just touches it up, or is it mostly VFX and then the stunt performers are just kind of there for reference? What would you say?
Well, dog wise, so we had real dogs and they got trained, and yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's like they were definitely trained to do some of what we wanted them to do, but not all of what we wanted them to do. And then on the day to actually do it correctly on camera. So in the end, like, for example, there's this shot, which we did do, sometimes these shots, like I said, are second unit, but we shot the one where you see dogs sort of one right after the other, like leaping on, it's like 3 people's throats as they get thrown backwards. And how we approached that in the end was that it was 3 stunt people, they're on jerk rigs and they're just falling back. And then those are CG dogs who get put into that shot, for example. But every shot's a little different. So some shots have real dogs in and some shots have CG dogs.
When the stunt performers are doing their whole thing of that controlled chaos and whatnot, do you watch those rehearsals pretty intensively and then decide where to put the camera, or you pretty much already have your idea, they're just kind of going through the motions and then you already know what you're going to film?
I guess it just depends, like we will have certain specific ideas for shots that will go in the previs that we know we're going to do. But there's plenty of times that, yeah, that we see something that happens on the day that, that we decide to do it a different way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of a specific example. I mean, it's a bit hard because obviously, like, 5 cameras, that's a lot of shots. And also, then you've seen the episode, it's a lot of cuts. So sometimes it's a little bit like, there's going to be this amazing horde of people running at you. sometimes you are just trying to hose it down, but sometimes specifically they're going to be falling through this window. So you're putting two cameras, there, one wider, one tighter, like specifically to get that moment. Like it just depends on what it is. I mean, things like windows breaking and jerk rigs, those are really specifically controlled moments that where the camera's going to be, where the window's going to break, where they're going to fall, how that works. But other things like people running, that's a little bit more let's see what magic we can get, basically.
The Last of Us is shot with multiple cameras, so you've heard it here first. This is a multicam sitcom. You can take it back to your acting classes.
Yeah, we know it's not a sitcom, but I will say, like, it is true that it's definitely part of the style that, to have multiple handheld cameras be able to follow the actors around these spaces. A lot of scenes get cross coverage done. So that's in the DNA of the show. And what it means for a DP like me, joining the show is just that, like, what I get into is obviously like the atmosphere of these spaces and setting the scene lighting wise in an appropriate way such that the cameras can have the freedom to lead and follow the actors and put the viewer with them. That's really how, that's what I would say is at the heart of the visual style of the show.
So, Katie, we talked about Joel's death. We talked about the assault on Jackson. What else about episode 2 was fun for you?
So the way that we end the episode, I think, was something that was written on the page as this montage, really, so with no words, no dialogue, which means the main, way you're telling the story is obviously through the imagery. And so whenever I see something like that, that's pure imagery, that's obviously very exciting for me. And I also think because it's an episode where it's just like the pace of it and the onslaught is just, it's so full on, and it's so like, I mean, I watched it with a group of friends, and, and everybody is just sort of shell shocked at the end, right? And so what I love about how we end it is just that everything slows down and suddenly shots are able to play out. And so this, of course, does start with that top shot that we talked about. But then you move to see, Abby and her gang leaving, and you reveal Jesse, and then you see Jackson in all of its, flaming glory. And you see, this was like a beautiful moment actually in the script about, like, the human toll is like somebody's getting bitten and somebody, their friend and neighbor has to shoot them. And you see Tommy and Maria coming together again. And so all of this, we just wanted, we wanted to keep the camera moving, but see that even though the show is all handheld, like suddenly, these are all crane shots, dolly shots, much more controlled, much more sort of, patient, choreographed. And then the last shot, we storyboarded and wanted to do it, as this one shot, basically, where you would see Jesse, rescuing Ellie, and you'd see Dina, and they're on horseback, and you wrap around them, and Ellie turns her head, that motivates the wraparound, and then you reveal Joel being dragged behind them, and then the last thing you see is the camera rises up, and you see them, moving off in the distance towards Jackson burning. Yeah, that shot was, it was one of those things where, like, it's all very well to, like, write it down on, draw it on paper and say, this is what we're gonna do. But then, of course, on the first day when we go to do it, the weather was misbehaving, the actor was running late, the crane was someplace else it wasn't meant to be, because this was all our first day on the mountain, and the logistics up there are really complicated. So we're just feeling it out. But we planned it for this first day because we knew if we didn't get it, there would be another opportunity. And so we didn't get it. I mean, it was it was the horses wanted to walk around the camera, like like the whole thing was not working, let's say. And so we got some shots, but we did not get the winner. And the editor cut it together, and Mark and Craig looked at it, and it was just like, no, this isn't what we planned. This isn't what we want to do. And so we, it's a testament to all of us, to the production, to everybody, that we came back and we did it again. And I'm just so glad we did, because I think it tells the story beautifully, and it's a wonderful way to just let the audience sort of sit with what has just happened, because I feel like what so many people have said to me is like, I couldn't believe that you actually that Joel actually died. And here you see it's like there he is being dragged, like they can't, it's undeniable basically. And so anyway, yeah, it's a good shot. I like the shot.
Yeah, it almost makes like a sort of ceremonial object of the shot too, because then it
Yes.
comes
Yeah.
back around when they do it again with a different character in episode 6. So you kind of crafted the framework, it looks like, that then
Oh yeah,
reverberated through
that's right.
everything.
It does
So
happen again. Yeah. Yeah.
it's a steel trap up here, guys.
Speaking of future episodes, Katie, I want to ask you about episode 4, which you also filmed. That's when they arrive in Seattle.
Yeah.
Earlier, you referenced that guitar store scene, and you mentioned that Kate Herron, right, your director, had played the game and was bringing some
Yeah.
knowledge to that. Could you go deeper into that scene and kind of what you guys had to do to pull it off?
Well, it's a wonderful scene because I guess the one thing that maybe is not true in the game, although Gianni, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but
Oh, and he will. He will. Don't worry.
my understanding is in the game by this point, like they're a couple already. So there's no tension there as far as like, will they or won't they, or what are their true feelings for one another, etc. Whereas in this telling, we don't know that. We don't know they're going to get together. They get together in this episode. And so to me, it adds this whole new layer to that scene, because what's really happening is that you see, Dina absolutely falling for Ellie. So in a way it's sort of wonderful to treat it visually, as in shot wise, just like the game, but then obviously what the actors are doing performance wise, and I think what I was doing with the lighting, which is a little different from the game, I think, I just wanted it to be like so sort of incredibly beautiful, and for us to see Ellie from Dina's point of view, completely sort of like haloed by this angelic light that's coming through. And even in the production design, actually, like all of the flowers, and it's just a really, really beautiful scene. And in the context of the episode and what happens later, I think it's so wonderful to get to do a scene like that, because then, where you go from there is just like into, red hell, basically. And so I love that contrast, and that those visual, dynamics are just so great to play with. And that was something that Craig talked about in my first interview with him, was like, there can be no darkness without the light, and really trying to keep that balance of light and shade. And I feel like episode 4 is like a perfectly balanced episode.
I always describe it as like it's the ethereal sort of pocket dimension in this absolutely dystopian world. So it's funny that moment in the game is an optional moment, not just throwing it out there for anyone who didn't know and plays the game. So you gotta be a real sicko to throw that one into the show, which I props to Kate Herron for wanting to do that, because it looks immaculate the way you've done it. I want to talk about, though, because you do something very interesting. You, I think, made an editor's life so easy in this scene directly following the music store scene, where you do this very subtle, uh, you introduce the music store through these extreme close-ups of like these little intricate things, these knobs and whatnot, and then expand it out and expand it out until you really see that sort of ethereal space when she steps upstairs. And then where it narratively cuts is Dina essentially offers to make Ellie food, and then you cut to an extreme close-up of a stove lighting, which then introduces what turns out to be Isaac's interrogation scene, which is a super dark contrast, speaking
Yeah.
exactly to the sort of dichotomy that you're talking about, that juxtaposition between light and dark. Was that always, was that on the page, I guess I should ask? Or was that just something that you had sort of thought up in your head of, this is how I kind of want to introduce this and like make the audience guess at to what's happening?
I think it must have been on the page. And Craig does write a lot of detail into the scripts, such that you can read the script and know a lot of times, where to put the camera and what details, need to be captured. So as far as like, yeah, all the details of the music store, I think that was, yeah, those are written in the script, and then the art department knows to put all those things in, and then to shoot all those things. So I think, yeah, the script is also referred to as the instructions. So you're definitely following those instructions. But yeah, the Isaac scene was so fun to shoot because which is weird to say because again, it was the scene where I thought everybody was going to get traumatized. It was a Saturday. We were working with the second unit crew. I was like, oh no, these poor people who don't even know us that well are going to go home with nightmares. And then because Jeffrey Wright was so wonderful and such a consummate professional, and so was the other actor in that scene, everybody just ate it up. They were just, the whole crew just loved watching those two actors work. And yeah, we tried to make that scene both. Obviously, it's darker in tone than the previous scene, but we didn't want to go too far, right? Because you set a torture scene in a kitchen, it can turn into Saw, right? If you're not careful. So there was definitely a balance we had to strike with, like, we didn't want to go into the horror territory at all. We definitely wanted to keep it, feeling more, yeah, more of our world, a little bit more grounded. And I guess the point in that scene, the way that scene develops is like, yeah, you don't actually know it's about torture until there's definitely like a reveal moment where you understand he's not going to cook. He's going to do something else.
It struck me as a scene where usually, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if this is not how you usually work, Catherine, but usually I think most cinematographers do a master and then get it into the sort of nitty-gritty into the close-ups. But it struck me as a scene that actually you probably just did Jeffrey Wright's coverage first because the scene likes to sort of reveal its things as it goes. Do I have that right, or did you guys just shoot the master and then just kind of keep it going with the chemistry of the guys?
Question. I think you are probably right. And we did do Jeffrey Wright first. I remember there being some funny business with some ordering just because, like, even though it feels like it's one big scene, the hand burn is like a moment where we do have to cut and apply the prosthetic. So I remember that we had to figure out some special order to do it to minimize time for the hand burn to come in and out. But I don't actually technically remember. But I would think we would have definitely prioritized Jeffrey's performance. Yeah.
And the reveals keep coming in that scene too, because it ends with another reveal of the guy outside the door is the guy that Isaac had saved in 2018 from the truck bombing, which I thought was just a stroke of genius in the script.
That's definitely in the script. But I think what wasn't originally scripted, I don't think, is that character would reoccur in episode 7. But we loved working with that actor so much. He was so good that I think that's why I brought him back because yeah, he was great. And suddenly it was like what he brought to the character, you wanted to see more of that character and see what, he was going to do. So
Is it Ben Ehlers? Do I have that
yes,
right?
Ben. Yeah, thank you.
This episode also opens with the 2018 scene, right?
Yeah.
I thought that there was a shot inside the vehicle that looked like Jeffrey Wright's face was blocked.
Yeah, that scene is another reveal. When he talks for the first time, that's when we want to notice him in the van, and we don't want to notice him before. So yeah, so he's got his head down, and we specifically sort of put him in a dark corner, such that we could shoot the two talking, the guy talking and people listening, including Ben, across from him, and not notice Jeffrey's character until he speaks.
Yeah, because as soon as I guess I see Jeffrey Wright in a HBO Max show, I go, "Oh yeah, I know, he's going to be around for a little."
Yeah, you get distracted. Like you're just like, oh, well, the scene's going to be about him. But you want the audience to be absorbed in this crazy monologue story that Josh Peck is telling at the start of the episode, and and these are all new characters, right? And this is a new place, and you don't know where you are, so you just want everybody to be absorbing that, And then when Jeffrey Wright's character speaks, what he's speaking to is actually the question that the audience will have had because I was watching it with a friend or no, I think it was my dad actually. And my dad was like, "Who are voters?" And I'm like, "Just watch the scene." Like, Jeffrey Wright's going to tell you, but
Well, Skid, you might not know this, but Jeffrey Wright actually reprises his role from the game. It's actually
I
a role
did
that he
know
originally.
I
this.
didn't know that. Oh wow, that's great.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
great.
So
Yeah.
it was very fun to pick into Isaac a bit. Can we talk a bit about the subway scene? Just because obviously that's another super intense action sequence, but totally different from the sequence that you saw in Jackson. This one is a much more confined space. Were you still able to have multicam for this type of sequence, or is it just too tight and you just got to find other ways to do it?
Good question. Good question. So yeah, so the subway car sequence was so fun to plan and execute. And the production designer, Don McCauley, built this incredible set down the length of this building that used to be, I think, a printing press or something like that. So it was a long, thin, very tall, tiled building that he just, he literally brought train cars into this building and put them there. So we definitely had to figure out how to light the space before those train cars came in, because the whole thing was a hot set, basically. And yeah, filled it with rubble. And anyway, so yeah, and obviously when they first discover the space, they're just coming in with their flashlights. You're meant to see it all that way, basically. And then the soldiers come in and they light the place up with these red flares. Now, the red flares were, a big, obviously, they're the lighting motivation, but as far as if we could use them practically to light the scene or not, we had to figure that out through testing, really, because yeah, it's a little bit of a health and safety concern to be burning flares inside periods of time, and the smell is awful. And so we knew we needed to have some other ways of doing that. So it was a sort of props and electrical collaboration to build these LED prop flares that basically, we could match the color and the flicker with the LEDs on the end, but then they could be, we could shoot them in camera and then they would be replaced later by VFX. So I think a lot of the in-camera sources you see wind up being those prop flares because, yeah, nobody really wanted us to light real flares. We had to do it for the throwing ones, but once they landed, then we sort of went around and replaced them. And then I'm accentuating all that with, some LED sources as well. And then as far as the cameras you asked about, yeah, so because that's a real train car, it's a very confined space. So the main coverage in there is our camera operator, Robin Smith, is basically just running with the camera through the train cars, leading and following them. But whenever they would stop and sort of turn around and shoot their guns, then we do that wherever there were doors. And so we could open one set of doors. I could put the B camera in that door so we could get a second camera angle. I did have the third camera, not most days down there, but I definitely remember having him. I can't remember anymore. So the days when we were just in the train cars, I think we used 2 cameras only. And then there's plenty of action that happens outside the train cars, and that we could do with 3 cameras.
So, Katie, as we mentioned earlier, you also did the cinematography for episode 7, which is the finale for season 2. Plot points aside, my takeaway from this, and maybe this is the AD in me speaking, is that night exteriors, water work, big pain in the ass. Talk to me about the challenge of this episode just in general and how you approached it.
Yeah, I think you're right. The challenges were definitely, how to approach all the different water work. And in the end, I can say we sort of did it all the ways. So yeah, some of the water work is practical in a tank. Some of it is what we call dry gimbal. So the boat is not actually in water, but it's on a gimbal mechanism that makes it look like it's floating, and all the water is added later in VFX. We also shot in actual, like an actual body of water that was when Ellie washes up on the beach. That is actually a location in Manatee Bay, not far from where we built our set. And so that was very challenging because obviously there's a storm happening. And so it wants to be raining, it wants to be lightning and windy, and all of that would churn up waves. And of course, it wasn't doing any of that for real, and there weren't real waves. And so our special effects supervisor, Joel Wist, he had to create all of that. So it was quite the setup. But yes, so fun to figure out where his barge would be with all of his, fans and wind machines and wave makers, and then where my lighting barges would be and where the camera barge would be, and and how we would safely be able to get Ellie in the water, get her out of the water, like not have Bella, I should say, like, freeze. So yeah, so it was definitely there are lots of logistics. We have a child in that scene on the beach as well.
Oh, right. Oh my God.
Their tides were wondering, not wondering, we knew exactly what the tides were going to do. And so we had to plan our shots exactly for when we had more beach versus less beach. So yeah, that night in particular was very, very challenging to plan. But yeah, it was also so fun, such a pleasure.
So it was all night shoots for that stuff. There's none of it that was day for night.
Oh no, no day for night. Yeah, that's
Wow.
that's all night for night. It has to be night for night because to get the lighting interactivity, I mean, yeah, I don't know a way to do that in the daytime. So it was definitely all night for night. Yeah.
What's impressive because these days, whenever I see something that's shot at night that I can actually see, I'm always like, oh, it's got to be day for night because there's just no way they could light it like that. So props to you guys because you did an amazing job. Like you can see everything.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
We have to talk about how you end the episode because obviously it's a major cliffhanger, but it's exactly the same as the cliffhanger that's sort of in the dead center of The Last of Us 2, the game. The shot for shot comparisons are out on the interwebs. Everybody can see them, but it is very, very uncannily accurate. Was this also one of those examples where the previs is just like you and director Nina Lopez Corrado just you didn't want to touch it. You were just like, it's what it is. Jesse's gonna die like this. Ellie's gonna cower in the corner of the bar. It's gonna be just like that.
Yeah, so I mean, there's no previs for a scene like that because that's a performance-led scene and no visual effects. But yes, the shot where Jesse dies, we watched it many times, and Craig mentioned it many times because I think, yeah, what I remember him telling us was he felt the shock that you feel when Jesse dies because of that shot, because that shot is just it's just behind them, it's just following them, and it doesn't you can see the camera's like surprised that he just sort of falls out of frame, and it happens in a moment. And so yeah, the set was designed to accommodate that shot, so that shot was very important. So
Mm.
we knew we were mimicking that. And I think, yeah, the set design is, yeah, I think we talked about the theater is basically, I think, recreating the game. But yeah, apart from that one specific shot, I think we're just, the actors are,
Just naturally giving that.
yeah, I think so. And so yeah, I'm not sure what else to say about that. But it wasn't, apart from the Jesse shot, that was the main, that's where I remember feeling like, oh, this moment needs to be like this. But everything else was sort of natural.
I'll ask a question that you're probably not allowed to answer, and it's okay if you say that you're not allowed to answer, but there's obviously more to this scene. Did you shoot any more to this scene that is not in the final cut?
We no, I mean, we shot what you see. Yeah, what you
Got
see
it.
is what we shot. Yeah.
And then you had said earlier something about shooting sequentially. So when you're dealing with the movie theater stuff, are you shooting the Ellie and Dina scenes in the movie theater also, sort of sequentially through as the at this, sort of I don't know what I'm trying to I think you get what I'm trying to say, but my phrasing is all messed up.
I
But
don't get what you're trying to say this time,
are
Gianni.
you
Maybe.
are you shooting the episode 4 scenes with Dina and Ellie in the movie theater and then also shooting the episode 7 scenes, or are you taking your time between in episodes?
Yeah, because each episode is with a different director, and so the way that it works is you prep with that director and then you shoot with that director, and all the days, yeah, the entire episode is scheduled as one block. So yeah, the theater set was built for episode 4, but it stayed standing because it does appear in episode 5 and it appears in episode 7. So that was literally our only sort of standing set that went across multiple episodes. But I think Kate Herron did come back during our episode 7 block shooting just for, you know what it was? I think it was when they come out of the subway and they see the theater across the street and they run across the street, and this is the moment where Dina is obviously thinking like, oh God, she's been bitten and now I have to kill her. That little connective tissue that was on a backlot and somehow got paired with other work that had to push. I can't remember why it all went later, but it went later, and Kate came back to do that. But it wasn't, I think we shot everything in the theater.
Last question I have about the theater, because there's the sort of front of theater and then obviously the theater itself. Are they two different sets or are they actually the one seamless set?
The inside of the theater is built on stage, and there is a tiny piece of the exterior that exists on the stage, but the larger exterior is a backlot set with a VFX extension.
Katie, you made me laugh earlier when you referred to the script as the instructions, and so somehow
Yeah.
Craig was communicating through. Do the scripts notate when a scene is meant to draw visually from the game, or is that something that just comes up as you're doing the breakdown and going?
It just comes up in conversation. Like Don McCauley, the production designer, he's on the job a lot longer than I am. Like he's there before I start, well before I start. And so he has a lot of the visual plans and ideas already for the sets. So, so we take a lot of inspiration from like the concept art that his department does. And but yeah, I mean the main sort of, there's a page turn you do with Craig at the beginning too, where you go through and he'll say, this scene we want to be like the game, and this scene's not in the game. So yeah, you find out, but it's not written in.
Speaking of the intentions for the show, in episode 7, it is notable that there's some gaps in the storytelling, particularly around Abby and the wolves. And I think it is public knowledge that there's going to be a season 3 and that it's going to focus on Abby. I think that's all out there. So none of that's a spoiler. But I'm curious how much of this was known on set during the filming of episode 7, and if it affected any of the way you film things in anticipation of this next set of work that's going to be done.
It's a good question. I'm trying to think. There's definitely things in the production design that are, I think, a little bit Easter eggy for stuff to happen in the future. Yeah, I think there's definitely a few things in episode 7 which are questions that are left unanswered.
There's clues in the makeup on Abby as well.
Yeah. So it's definitely like it's the it's being thought about, but yeah, I mean generally speaking, we're shooting what our scripts are, and yeah, and Craig's letting us know, if there's things that need to be pointed out, but that, I don't know, that's kind of it.
And our efforts to be a scoop show are once again stymied. Thank you, Katie. That's it's always trying to get that scoop on season 3. Are you going back for season 3, Katie? Do you know how it's going to unfold?
No, I honestly don't know.
We will have to see how it unfolds. If you do, we're going to want you to come back here. Where else can we see your work? What's next for you?
Oh, well, I'm in Budapest at the minute on a show, but I'm not sure I'm supposed to talk about it. So just stay tuned, I guess.
Again, no scoops here. Well, we'll keep trying. Well, on that note, we'll call it a wrap. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Listeners, I always appreciate your feedback. My email address is skid@belowtheline.biz. That's B-I-Z. Belowtheline.biz is also our website, where you'll find more than 260 past episodes. So if you're a new listener, check out the catalog. Closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and all of our listeners, I appreciate you. If you're a fan of Below the Line, consider a purchase. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Other ways you can help. First, give us a positive rating wherever you get your podcasts. Second, tell your friends about an episode you enjoyed, because that's how we gain new listeners. All of that aside, whatever your engagement, the fact that you're still listening means a lot to me. Thanks again from Below the Line.
So I don't know. Should I stop?
Okay. Let me. So no, I'll set that up. Let me set it up like this then. No, actually, maybe I'll just I will ask it like that. Just a little cleaner. I'll say, Katie, what a. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to edit it together. But Katie, you just start talking about it. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to say on that.
Okay. Well, yeah, I don't know exactly what you should ask either, but I'll just start talking.